Summer is nearly over. School's starting. Fall season is around the corner. Before you know it, the holidays are going to be upon us. Things are about to get really busy. Last week we talked about this passage in Ecclesiastes that says there's a time for everything. And in these busy seasons, some of you think, yeah, there is a time for everything, and the time is right now. I got to get it all done at once. So with so much to do, when is there going to be time to rest, to reflect, to be renewed? This is not just a 21st century issue. People in the first century were faced with similar issues. And there's a story in the Gospels. It's just a beautiful, simple story. You don't hear about it too much. It's just kind of like in our consciousness. If you've been around church at all in your life, you might have heard this. But it's a story about the tensions between doing and being. It's about working and waiting. It's a story that can help us navigate the busyness of our lives today and in the coming months, because you all know, well, for Mike, it's already here. I mean, this is the busiest time of the year when all this heat comes and there's all kinds of issues. He was telling me some of the things that his agency is concerned with and that he has to deal with. And you know, number one is the politicians, trying to keep them at bay. But anyway, so I want to read this story to you, and then we're going to make some observations and some applications. Here it is. Luke 10, 38 through 42. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said, but Martha was distracted by all her preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." Simple story, right? So a couple of observations before we go into it. First of all, this is in the context. This chapter is a chapter about doing. It starts out with the commissioning of the 70 disciples that Jesus sends out to do all kinds of ministry, to teach and to preach and to heal the sick and to cast out demons. And so there's a lot of doing. And then what follows that story is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And this is a story about a man who goes way beyond what was expected to do good for somebody. So that's kind of the context of the textual context of this story. It says that Jesus came to a village where a woman named Martha was. And it's generally agreed that this village was Bethany, and that the person that Luke is talking about is Martha of the Lazarus, Martha, and Mary fame. And it says she opened her home. She opened her home. Now, if you understand, if you think about it, she knew what she was doing, because this is not a chance meeting. She knew who Jesus was. He's coming through the area. She opens her home. She invites him in. And it wasn't just Jesus. He had at least 12 other people, or 11 other people with him, and maybe more than that, because there were women that traveled with Jesus as well. So she had quite a crowd to contend with in her home. If you know anything about first century houses or homes, unless you were a king or you were extremely rich, they're pretty small. Usually there's 2 rooms, one for the people, one for the animals. And a lot of times they both were in the same room. So today what I want to do is give you 3 don'ts and 3 do's. First of all, I just want you to know, as we go into this story is not about the superiority of religious devotion over getting things done. Because there's a lot of doers here in our congregation. So we're not taking pot shots at the doers at all. I just want you to know that. It's not about honoring laziness, and it's not even a statement about faith versus works. This entire chapter is about doing. As I said, the 70 were sent out to do, to preach, to teach, to heal, to deliver. And the story of the Good Samaritan is about a man who did way beyond what he was asked to do. And Jesus commended all of that. This is a story about priorities. Yes, about priorities, but even more than priorities, it's about attitude. And that's what our young ladies just sang about, humbling ourselves before God. It's about our attitudes and openness toward God and the choices that we all can make. So first of all, let's do the don'ts. The don'ts. First of all, don't let the urgent supersede the significant. I try to come up with fancy words, to express this. Verse 39 and 40 says, "She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said, but Martha was distracted by all her preparations that had to be made." Mary sat listening to Jesus while Martha was busy with her work. Was there work to do? You bet there was. A lot of work. There's all these people she had to feed and wait on. If you've ever had to feed a large group, that's why I mentioned, the holidays are coming up and some of you are having family come over. And you know how that goes. It's so much fun. And there's just a lot of work. And the other question that came to my mind as I read this is, were the work and the preparations important? Well, absolutely they were important. This was the master and his entourage. So it was very important. It says, Mary sat listening to what Jesus said, but Martha was distracted. How important were the words of Jesus versus the work that needed to be done? Remember, in another place in the Gospels, Jesus said, "The words I speak to you are life." The words I speak to you are life. More important than work. But another question that came up is, could Martha have listened while she was working? As I said, it's probably one room. I don't know, maybe two. It wasn't like she was in a completely different part of the estate. She was distracted, not distracted as in losing her focus, but rather she was very focused on doing what she was doing. She was focused on her work, so the Mary Jesus thing was actually what was distracting her. That was the distraction. Sometimes on Sabbath Way Day, and Sabbath Way Day is our once-a-month opportunity. On Sabbath afternoon, we try to emphasize Jesus calling us to partnership with Him in ministry. So Sabbath afternoon, we encourage people to do something to help someone. Go visit someone. Go sing for the folks in the Alzheimer's home. Diana and a group of ladies, they quilt and make quilts for the homeless and those who are sick. Deliver food. We take food down to the mobile home park, and we've taken it other places. So Sabbath Way Day, once a month, that's what we do. And sometimes on Sabbath Way Day, a lot of us do nothing but sit around and talk. Because Sabbath is about resting, right? Sometimes we just need to rest. We just need to not do. So we sit around and talk about stuff. We talk about spiritual stuff. We talk about Bible stuff, ministry stuff. So a couple months ago, a group of us were sitting around the tables talking, and Diana and some of the others, they were busy working on the quilts out here. We open up the walls. They're working on the quilts. And what she's doing, the quilts, that's important because that's a ministry. Those quilts are given away to people who need comfort. They need warmth. Our talk was about theology and about our opinions. Maybe our talk wasn't so important. But Diana said to us, "Could you guys move a little closer so that we can hear what you're talking about?" And I wondered as I read this story, now why couldn't Martha have done that? Why couldn't she say, "Jesus and Mary, come over here a little bit. I want to hear what you're talking about." But she didn't. She didn't. She was distracted by her own focus on what she considered to be urgent, and she let it supersede what was truly significant. She didn't have to stop working. She just needed to start listening. Notice the words of Jesus from Matthew 6 about focus and attention. It says, "Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow." How many times have we read this verse here from up front? And yet, it always comes back fresh. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now. Your entire attention to what He's doing right now. What was Jesus doing right then, in the now of this story? He was talking. Maybe He was answering a question. Maybe He was sharing a relevant insight. Whatever. The point is, it was Jesus. Jesus, the Master, the Rabbi, the Messiah, the Lord. When God is speaking, are you listening? Whatever you're doing, when God is speaking, are you listening? Martha's problem is that she was so caught up with the urgent that she was missing the important. Now, last week we talked, as I mentioned, about Ecclesiastes and how it says there's a time for everything. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to sow, a time to reap. It goes through 14 different contrasts of a time to do different things. And so we have calendars, we have clocks, and we have calendars for all of this stuff. If you're really organized, you write it all down and then you execute it. Some of us write it down after the fact when we've executed it, so it looks like we planned it and then we execute it. We pat ourselves on the back. That's me, not Diane. But life is not all about clocks and calendars. There may be a time for every purpose under heaven, as we saw last week in Ecclesiastes 3, but a holy moment can surprise and interrupt our routine. Sometimes Jesus shows up unexpectedly. I don't know if Martha knew Jesus was coming. Maybe not. In those days, they didn't have cell phones. They couldn't text ahead, or email or call or anything. So maybe he just came to town. She heard about it, like, Jesus, stay here. I mean, she invited him in. And sometimes, just like with this story, Jesus shows up unexpectedly. He interrupts our plans and our preparations, even when those preparations are about Him. Even when they're about Him. As my friend John Garner says, sometimes we're so caught up in the work of the Lord that we forget the Lord of the work. I like that. I don't know if that's an original with John, but I've always remembered that. We get so caught up with the work of the Lord that we forget the Lord of the work. Holy moments. Like the moment when everything was kind of tense in the darkened delivery room. My oldest daughter was being delivered, and we had chosen to do what they called, it was the in thing back in the 70s, the La Boyer method, where they're born and they're immediately put into a bath of warm water, and the lights are all low. Hospitals do not like dark rooms. They don't like them. So we had to find someone who would work with us, and we did. And so there's a lot of concern. The baby's got to be born, the baby's got to breathe, we've got to make sure that circulation is going, and the baby is viable and all that stuff. So there's a lot of tension. There are a lot of things that have to be done. And I remember the holy moment when my oldest daughter was born and she opened her eyes. She gave a little squeal. It was the only time when she was soft-spoken. Only time in her life. She gave a little, kind of a little cry when she took her first breath, and that was it. And then her eyes opened, and it was like she was in wonder of this new world that she had just come into. That was a holy moment, a holy interruption for me in all of this. All of my concerns about everything else is just, the focus was right there. Or a moment like a few weeks ago when Diane and I were on vacation. I was sitting on the cliffs overlooking Pismo Beach, kind of up the coast from Pismo Beach, and just enjoying the air, and been walking around and taking pictures, and all of a sudden this lady said, "Have you ever seen the whales?" It's like, "Lady, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me?" And I said, "Actually, no, I never have." And so she said, "Would you like to see them?" And she handed me a pair of binoculars. And I looked, and out between where I was in Pismo Beach, just off of the coast, there were some pretty big whales. And I saw as they breached And I saw the tails go. It wasn't like the high-definition movie. I was looking through binoculars at tiny little things out in the water, but I'd never seen any of it. And then I saw I don't know what they call it, but when the whale blows off it's not steam, but it's spray. I saw it. It was amazing. It was an interruption. And then this other guy comes up, and he says, "What are you looking at?" And she said, "Oh, whales. Have you ever seen the whales?" He says, "It's probably not a whale. It's probably just it's the dolphin. There's no whales out there." It's like, you're a hater. What are you doing here? Don't let the urgent supersede the significant. Second, don't. Don't let self-absorptions distract from spiritual awareness. Self-absorptions distract you from spiritual awareness. Verse 41 and 42 says, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset by so many things, but only one thing is needed." So here we get a much better clue about what was going on with Martha. She was, in this moment, in this story, I'm not saying this is the way she was all the time, but here she was very self-absorbed. So much so that she says to Jesus, can you imagine? She says to Jesus, "Don't you care? Come on. Don't you care? Don't you care that my sister's letting me do all the work? Don't you care about me?" She lets her frustration leak all over the place. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Martha was very happy to have Jesus there. The passage that says she opened her home, actually, in the Greek, by the way, you don't have to be a Greek scholar. Do you know on Bible Gateway, you can go onto Bible Gateway and type in a passage and then use the Mount's interlineary version, and it'll show you a transliteration of the Greek into English. And so you can sometimes get a little closer to the original meaning of the words. And the word that's used there is she welcomed him. She didn't just open her house up. She welcomed Jesus into her home. So she was happy he was there. But in this story, she's not happy. Who knows what was going on in her mind? Maybe she and Mary had words before this scene. Maybe she had a simmering resentment towards Mary's fondness of Jesus. This isn't the only time we see Mary and Jesus kind of very close. Mary is very, very close to Jesus. You know how some people have an affinity? Well, I think that's how it was with Mary and Jesus. Maybe Martha was the one who always did the work and Mary didn't do so much. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But in any case, Martha was the kind of person who didn't find it hard to say what was on her mind. I mean, come on. Whatever she's feeling, whatever she's thinking, she's Miss Honesty herself. This is Jesus she's talking to, and she says, "Don't you care?" The issue here is not about laziness versus industry. It's about where the focus is. Mary was focused on who? Who was Mary focused on? She's focused on Jesus. Martha was focused on all the stuff she had to do for Jesus, and then on her feelings about Mary not helping her out. But true to form, Mary was the kind of person also that once one cow got out of the pen, she let the whole herd out, because she didn't just say, "Don't you care?" That's one thing. She goes on and she presumes to tell Jesus, who's the one who tells people what to do. She tells him what to do. Tell Mary to help me. Jesus, you have more authority than I do, so you tell her to help me. I can imagine Jesus looking at her and saying, "What? Are you talking to me? Are you talking to the one who spoke and the universe came into existence? Are you talking about the great I am?" And Jesus didn't do all that. He didn't pull a power trip on her. It's kind of funny. She tries to manipulate God. We never do that, do we? No. Do you ever pray, "God, do this. God, do this over here for me. Can't you take care of this problem, God?" God, when are you going to give me what I asked for? I know we don't say those words, but our attitudes reflect that oftentimes. How's it going? Well, I asked God, and it just doesn't seem to be working out. God, how come? Well, Jesus got the picture, but he didn't respond to Martha the way she spoke to him. He responded kindly. He says, you're worried and you're upset by so many things. And it's interesting when he in the Gospels, often you'll read about Jesus saying someone's name twice, Martha, Martha, and it's actually taken as a sign of endearment. Jesus loved Martha. His connection with his family was very deep and very precious to him. And he's, Martha, you're worried and upset about so many things. I wonder what so many things were. Was it just the preparations, or were there issues going on? Were there any hurts or habits or hang-ups for Martha? Was she a good candidate for Celebrate Recovery? Maybe. And Jesus continued, he says, only one thing is needed. Only one thing is needed. What was it that was needed? What was needed? What is the most important thing? What is the better part? Colossians 3 kind of gives us a little light on this. It says, don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with the things right in front of you. Look up and be alert to what is going on around Christ. That's where the action is. See things from his perspective, from the message. Martha was so absorbed in her own stuff. The things right before her, she's just focused on all this stuff she had to do. I've got to do this and this and this. I should have finished and had that finished and should have started this other project. And where's Mary? She's never around when there's work to be done. Doesn't she know who it is we're entertaining tonight? I can hear the thoughts just flowing out of her head. Does Mary know who is in the house? I can hear that one too. Does Mary even know who this is? And there she is sitting at his feet, drinking in every word. Martha was spiritually blinded by her own agenda. And Colossians says, be alert to what is going on around Christ. It's not that we want God to do to fulfill our desires and our plans, but we need to be in on what God is doing in any given moment, on any given day. Be alert to what is going on around Christ, because that's where the action is. That's where the action is. The action isn't in all our work for God. Remember this, I mentioned in this chapter, the 70 disciples had gone out and done all this amazing ministry. They had been doing it hard for I don't know how long, maybe a few weeks. And Jesus told them when they came back, you can read about it earlier in Luke 10, he said, you rejoice over all the results of what has happened, all the work on my behalf. Even the demons were cast out. But you should be rejoicing over one thing, that your names are written in the books of heaven. Mary knew that she was accepted. Mary was rejoicing that she could sit there with Jesus and she was completely accepted. And Martha was trying to earn her acceptance. I don't know. She was certainly all about her stuff, and she was not about what was going on around Jesus. So don't let your self-absorption distract you from spiritual awareness. Mary chose what is better, and Jesus wasn't about to tell her to get up and go do what Martha wanted. You notice he didn't tell Mary anything. Mary cared about one thing. She cared about one thing. She cared about the words of Jesus. That's what she cared about. Really. Just being close to Jesus, just like we say, draw me close to you. Seems like Martha's self-worth was wrapped up in her efforts of hospitality. She was proud of her gifts and would have liked a little bit of recognition for them. Don't you care I can interpret really as, don't you care that I'm doing all this for you? And you're giving my sister all this attention, but she's doing nothing. What about me? Don't you care? Could really be, don't you care about me? I love this verse in Jeremiah 9. Verse 9, 23, chapter 9, 23 through 24. The wise must not brag about their wisdom. The strong must not brag about their strength. The rich must not brag about their money. But if people want to brag, let them brag that they understand and know me. And you say, well, what does this story have to do with bragging? I think Martha was proud of what she could accomplish. She's proud of her gifts. She had a right to be proud about it. You know, politicians are really good at this, aren't they? Here's what I did. You're going to hear this for the next, I don't know how many months, 16 months, ad nauseum. Here's what I did. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm the answer because I'm so rich. Donald Trump. Because I'm so strong and I've been there. Hillary Clinton. Because I'm so smart. Bernie, but you wouldn't know it by looking at his picture. We're not playing politics, honest. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but politicians have this ability to brag about stuff, but Christians do too. We like to brag on ourselves too. We like to brag on our accomplishments, on our ministry, on our efforts for God. And I can say there's so many times when I've not only been tempted, but I've actually done it, where I'll say things like, well, back in 1970, we did this in Mission Beach, and I'm so proud of that. Well, it's not going today. It's a swimsuit and lingerie shop on the street. It's not a vegetarian outreach ministry anymore. Or when I pastored in the South, we did this. Jeremiah says, if you're going to brag, then brag that you know and understand God. And what is God? If you go on, God is merciful. He's patient. He doesn't mind us taking time to listen to Him. He loves kids. He loves sinners. He loves, period. Let your pride be all about who you know, not what you can do. Don't let the superficial, I skipped that one, sorry, Brian. This was all about, don't let the superficial obscure the Savior, where Jesus said, Mary has chosen what was better, and it won't be taken from her. So now 3 do's. 3 do's to take with you. What can we learn from Mary? Most of this was focused on Martha. What can we learn from Mary? How do we choose the better part? First of all, sit. Sit. Well, that could be slow down. Slow down. The passage says that Mary, when we come on the scene, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. She stopped her activity. She rested. She took a Sabbath moment. Maybe Mary just took a moment. Maybe it wasn't hours on end that she was there. Maybe she had every intention of helping Martha, and maybe she'd already started out helping her, and she'd be happy to do that, but Jesus interrupted her work. Does Jesus ever interrupt your work? When is Sabbath? Where is Sabbath? Well, I'd like to suggest, and if you've been around North Hills very long, you know that our theology on Sabbath is a little broader than what some of us were raised on. Sabbath is whenever Jesus shows up. That's Sabbath. That's a time to stop and listen. Sabbath is wherever Jesus shows up. That's Sabbath. It says in Hebrews 4:9. I love Hebrews 3 and 4. They're just such great chapters in the Bible. But this simple phrase, it says, there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. There's a special rest still waiting for the people of God. And if you think it's only about the 7th day, just read those 2 chapters. You're going to find out that the rest he's talking about is a spiritual rest and trust and confidence in God's ability to take us through whatever we're going through. It's not just the 7th day. It's any day, any time when God speaks to us. And how will we know He is speaking if we don't sit? If we don't slow down? If we don't take some time? How will we know The Sabbath day teaches us that our work is never done. Yeah, I don't know about before the fall. We don't know anything about before the fall except the little the Bible tells us. I know about after the fall. I know about after Adam and Eve took the fruit. And the way it works after the fall is our work is never done. And that's why God throws Sabbath right into the middle of our busy lives, our harried schedules and hurried schedules. And He interrupts us and He says, stop. Just stop. Just stop. And the stuff we're doing can be very important, for sure, but this is an interruption, and God calls us. Once a week, He calls us to sit. Maybe we need to actually sit down and shut up. But He calls us to rest, to cease. This should be happening not just on the seventh day. It should be happening throughout the week. We should be having these Sabbath moments through the week where Jesus shows up in our lives. We sit and we listen. And that's the second do, is listen. Listen. Open up. Open up. The passage says Mary was listening to what He said. Hebrews 3:15 says, today when you hear His voice, don't harden your hearts. This verse is repeated in Hebrews 3 and 4 several times, and it's actually a quote from one of the Psalms. And it's about the people in the desert that God was leading out of Egypt into the promised land. And He says, when you hear His voice, my voice spoke to those people out in the wilderness. I came to them in a cloud. I came to them in fire. I came to them through Moses. I came to them on Mount Sinai. And when I spoke, they pretended to listen. They didn't. Instead, they hardened their hearts. And so they never entered my rest. Now, you know that every 7 days, that group of people going across the desert for 40 years, they kept the Sabbath faithfully. But Hebrews says, and Psalm says, they never entered the rest of God. The rest of God goes much deeper. Today, when you hear His voice, don't harden your hearts. To be able to hear, you have to listen. Hearing is, the way I define it, is sound coming into our ears. Listening is our choice to try to understand what that sound means. And you know what it takes in order for us to stop, to cease our own agenda? You know what it takes? It takes just what Tamara and, say it louder, Dawn, okay. Dawn. It takes just what Tamara and Dawn sang about. Humility. Humble yourself before God. Humbling isn't about putting on sackcloth and ashes and weeping before God and pretending to be something you're not. Humbling yourself before God is to do what Mary did, to sit at the feet of Jesus and take in His words. That's humbling yourself before God. Humility is to say, I don't already know it all, so I can listen. Humility is, I can stop my work here and listen to His word. Don't harden your hearts, Hebrews says. Don't turn away from what Jesus is saying. Like Martha was doing, actually. She wasn't hearing what Jesus said. She was hearing the voices in her head and all upset about stuff. Instead, open up to God when you hear His voice. And then the third do is seize the moment. Jesus said Mary chose the better part. When she saw Jesus and she heard Jesus, she acted on it and she came close to Him. She seized the moment of spiritual light and she fixed her attention on the Master. We close with this last verse from Romans 12. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. What does that mean? Does that mean about all the sinful things that are going on in the culture? Well, yes, that means. But it also means the culture that we have the way that we are, the way we do things. Don't become so accustomed to doing the things the way that you were taught, the way that you think is expected, the way that you want to do them, that you fit into it and you don't even think about what you're doing. Instead, Paul says in Romans 12, instead, fix your attention on God. Fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. What did He want from Mary? He wanted her to listen. What did He want from Martha? He wanted her to listen too. Did Jesus want Martha to stop her work? No, it doesn't ever say that. It doesn't ever say that. She could have kept working. Diana keeps working, and she hears our wonderful theological discussions when she does. And she participates. I don't know how she can sew and talk without piercing her fingers. That would be what I would do. That's why I can't do that kind of thing, when I'm having a theological discussion. Don't give me pins, needles, or knives when I'm talking about theology. That's a bad idea. What God wants from you and from me, first and foremost, is our attention. Is our attention. Seize the moment. As you give Him your attention, as you slow down and take a moment every day. And you say, man, I've heard that so many times. Well, yeah, why are you still not doing it? Every day, take a moment, slow down, listen to what God is saying to you, because I guarantee you He's speaking to you. And then as you take that in, take hold of what He's telling you. I don't know what it might be. Maybe it's to be more open and more caring towards your spouse. Maybe it's to make a phone call to somebody that you haven't talked to for a long time who might need your help. Maybe it's to take stock of your life and see what's going on and let Him point out some things that can be changed. Maybe it's to ask for help in an area of your life where you're not able to change. I don't know what it might be, but God does. And if you listen, if you pay attention, if you clear the clutter out of your mind and your heart just for a few moments every day, and Sabbath day is a great day, then when you hear it, take hold of it. Take hold of it. It's a little story. Just a little story about Martha and Mary. Living in a little town called Bethany. Jesus shows up. So much we can learn from this story. So much we need to learn. I just wonder, would you guys mind singing that song one more time for closing? Come on.
In the sight of the Lord, humble thyself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up higher and higher, and He will lift you up. Let there be kneeling and praying in the sight of the Lord.
Kneeling and praying in the sight of the Lord.
Kneeling and praying in the sight of the Lord.
Praying in the sight of the Lord.
And He will lift you up higher and higher, and He will lift you up. For our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns So humble thyself in the sight of the Lord.
Humble thyself in the sight
Oh,
of the
humble
Lord.
thyself in the sight of the
Humble
Lord.
thyself in the sight of the Lord.
And He